Welcome to Unplug with Mel. I'm your host, Mel Mosier. We have a special guest joining us from Austin, Texas, Stephen English. In today's episode, Stephen unfolds a captivating narrative on radical responsibility, having some faith and hope, offering practical insights for self-reflection, and auditing your inputs. As he shares his authentic journey through recovery, Stephen becomes a living testament to the transformative power of purpose. I was so moved by his story that I found myself taking notes and capturing every inspiring moment. How he went from working in the corporate world to becoming a coach. So without further ado, hit play and join me on this exploration of purpose with the extraordinary Stephen English. Get ready for some real-time inspiration, practical wisdom, and a fresh perspective on personal growth. This is Unplug with Mel, where we tell our stories to inspire infinite growth. Welcome, Steve, to Unplug with Mel. I guess I should introduce you formally as Steve English. We met through Lincoln, through a podcast that you released with our mutual friend, Holly Darby. Other than that, I don't know much about you. So this is going to be a fun podcast.
Yeah.
I like it.
Choose your own adventure, right?
It's a venture. I don't know much about you or where you're from. I didn't do a let's get to know each other. I take a gamble. Let's go with this. So
that's great.
with Unplug with Mel, it's to tell your story and inspire infinite growth. I don't give out bios because that's a lot of bios to memorize. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'd say the right parts of the bios or not. So I let you go for it. So you tell this audience who you are, where you're from, and anything else about you that you would like the world to know.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mel. I really appreciate you doing this podcast with me, inviting me on as a special guest. And yeah, like you mentioned, I worked with Holly Darby as her coach. I am a recovering engineering manager from 22 years in the semiconductor industry. I now use my optimism, innovativeness, and passion to help other people succeed happily, as opposed to succeeding through nothing but grit and pushing themselves and pain. My personal motto is I see more in people than they see in themselves, and I want more for them than what they believe is possible. I've been a owner of my own coaching and training business for the last 5 years. I'm in my 6th year. And prior to that, as I mentioned, I was an engineering manager working for companies like Samsung, ST Microelectronics, Cirrus Logic, Honeywell, and so forth and so on. So I'm STEM educated, but very much heart-centered, strong empathy circuit, very much in love with people, which is it's an odd background. And it took me a while to align myself with who it is that I truly was deep down, but I'm now getting to do what I really, really love to do.
Well, it sounds like a mutual connection there with HR industry, which is what I'm a part of, which is people centered in its entirety. So I love that that's how we kind of connected through Holly Darby. Give a shout out to her.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
I'm amazed that so you're retired and you just one day you thought about, I need to go figure out what else I need to do.
Yeah. I don't know if I would characterize it as retirement. I'm too young to really retire. It was a career transition. I left that behind me. And I say recovering engineering manager because there's often times where my analytical problem solving brain, it's pulled back to the technology space, or it's pulled back to working with engineers or something to that effect. It's when you've been doing something that long, it's a slow road to full transition. I feel like now, I mean, obviously, because I haven't had a W-2 paycheck from an engineering company for more than 3 years, the umbilical cord has been cut. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. In terms of, my story, how did I get here? So like a lot of engineers, I was really, really good in math and science in high school. And so I took the path of least resistance and went off to get a physics degree and then a material science degree and then joined industry right out of my master's.
Awesome. Well, in that, I don't know where are you at currently right
Oh,
now? Where are you living?
yeah, I'm in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
So I originally hail from. I was born in Ohio. It's a long story of all the stops that I made. Whenever I tell people my, let's say, my journey, they're like, "Was your dad in the military?" So no, I moved around a ton, which I feel that that was helpful in a lot of ways because it forced me to really build a social adaptability.
Mhm.
But yeah, now I live in Austin, Texas.
Okay, we're not too far from you. I'm out in
No,
Midland.
yeah,
Okay, well, in this, we're gonna take the journey. We're gonna take us down this journey. You get to lead us the way you want to, and share some key moments or experiences that shaped who you are today. You just gave a brief over it about moving into a heart-centered area of who Steve is. So go ahead and
yeah.
share us your journey.
Yeah, when I started to think about that, I said to myself, "How far do I want to go back?" It's like, how much time do we have? I'll start here. So, as I mentioned, I graduated from getting a master's degree from North Carolina State University, material science, and I went off to work at my first company, which was at the time it was named Allied Signal. Allied Signal bought Honeywell and took the name. And there, I would say the most significant thing was that within 2 months of being at the company, I was identified to go off to Six Sigma black belt training. I
Oh
skipped
wow.
the yellow belt, I skipped the green belt. They sent me directly to black belt training, which was, I didn't realize at the time how valuable that was,
Mhm.
but they really invested a ton in me. And that's back when companies would really spend a ton of time and money on high potential employees. They sent me off for 4 weeks, 1 week per month for 4 months in Olathe, Kansas. It was really nothing to do there except for work on your Six Sigma project. So I got my black belt early on. Unfortunately, Allied Signal and Honeywell, when they merged, they had some duplication of some facilities. So they shut down the facility that I was at. They laid me off, and I went briefly to a little company for about 3 months. And because I wasn't yet married and I didn't have a mortgage or any of that, I was very quick to leave a bad job. And then I went off to Arizona to ST Microelectronics. And I would say what it was that really shaped who it is that I am from that career stop was that there, after really a short time, they saw something in me about training. And I really don't remember the conversation, but in 2002, 2003, they said, "We want you to be our effective presentation skills trainer for the site and the region." So I got to travel a little bit, and I all of a sudden found myself teaching people to communicate better, even though I myself probably had a ton of that imposter syndrome at that point because
Yeah.
I was never a thespian. I didn't do any of those things in high
Yeah.
school. I was really a closed off nerdy kid. I was a physics major for Christ's sake. So, but what was cool about working there was that, number one, they let me do that, which was do the training course, and then I saw that they were using an outdated quality methodology, if you will, and that was TQM, total quality management. It was
Mhm.
started in the 50s. So you could think, hula hoop skirts and Fonzarelli,
Yep.
and I went I saw that. I saw that was a really great opportunity, especially when there was a customer audit and the customer asked, "Do you use Six Sigma?" And it was like a little light bulb moment for me. And I led a company-wide initiative, very green, very junior. I didn't really have anybody telling me, "Go do this, go do this." It was more of, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Like, the worst thing that could happen is they might say no. So I got into that whole change management activity and almost unconsciously, right? Like, I didn't do it on purpose at all. While I was there, I got to fly to France and Italy and Singapore, I came to Carrollton, Texas, from Phoenix, Arizona. Not much of a trip there in terms of distance, but I really grew quite a bit at that company in terms of my confidence and recognizing that I had influence. I actually had influencing skills, and I then leveraged that to make another move. I left there and I went to Samsung Austin Semiconductor. I came to Austin, Texas in 2006. So it almost makes me a native. I got to Texas as quick as I could. Now seeing Austin blow up as it has in the last 17 years,
Mhm.
it's been really crazy. But what was significant about working at Samsung was that, again, I got to do that change initiatives. But what happened was that I went to Korea for 5 weeks. And because of the culture there, in terms of
Mm.
after work, everybody goes drinking. It was like pouring gasoline on a pilot light of alcoholism. So that began, like you say, what is it what were the events that made you who you are today? And I don't want to paint this picture of this rosy picture of, oh, I'm just taking on challenge after challenge and winning, winning, winning. Here I came back from Korea a daily drinker,
Mm.
and after about a year, I got my first DWI, and then it just kept snowballing and snowballing and snowballing. So I can talk more about that when in other questions, but I want to, go ahead and say, hey, it's not all rosy here.
Sure.
And then in about what is it, about 2017, I left Samsung. I got sober. So 2016, August 29th, 2016, I got sober. By 2017, I realized I couldn't live in that toxic work environment. I just couldn't live with the management style that was there. So I had enough personal power. So I left there and I went to Cirrus Logic, which is a much better company. So if any of your listeners who are thinking of, hey, I want to go work for a semiconductor company, choose Cirrus all day long. Uh, but I still knew I wasn't aligned with
Mhm.
who it is that I am deep down. And so I went in and I really looked at four different options. So I was either going to get an MBA, go back and go to UT, get the executive MBA, or the other one was lean into the Six Sigma stuff, which was, talk to people who were Six Sigma consultants. Then I had an uncle who did training, and I have an uncle, he's still alive. I have an uncle who does training and workshop facilitation. So I said, hey, maybe I can go do that. And then the last one was I had a friend who became an executive coach. So I investigated all of those and landed on the training, workshop facilitation, and executive coaching. And that's how I got to where I am today.
And what is your coaching podcast stuff called?
Oh, I don't have necessarily a podcast. I just do LinkedIn lives. I do
LinkedIn
lives with
Live.
people.
Okay, I
Yeah,
knew I'd seen something. Okay, cool.
I just do
What do
LinkedIn
you
lives. I
do?
use StreamYard just like you.
Oh,
I, I
and then your coaching is like one-on-one and
I do one-on-one and also group
group.
coaching, and then I do uh, different training classes. I Part of my transition out was to start with that effective presentation skills training. So that was the first class that I offered. And then I do some different workshops through the DISC brand, which of course everybody knows DISC. Not everybody, but I think most people, especially in the HR space, know about DISC. So I do DISC, I do 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. I do those kinds of workshops, and then I also do some training courses.
So you're fitted for if an employer is looking for, a third party to come in, or if an individual is looking for some coaching.
Yes, and that causes me to be completely transparent. That does cause some confusion in the marketplace, and I'll talk to marketing coaches who will be say, "Hey, you got to lead with one of them," and so I'm choosing to lead more, and it may not even be reflected in my current LinkedIn. I really want to lead more with the individual, and then land and expand. So in other
Yeah.
words, I've worked with a lot of vice presidents, business owners, C-suite, and once I'm in at that with the trust with them, then I can expand in my offerings that I bring to the company.
Awesome. Well, then we'll go right into our next question. And I think it would kind of tie into more of the struggles
Oh
in
yeah.
creating who Steve is. I like the fact that you touched on not everything is, tied in a neat little rainbow
No.
bow gift wrapped. How did you overcome there? What are some strategies you used or help along the way that helped you overcome what you were struggling with back then?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll first start with the struggles. The struggle early on that was a real dull sensation was that misalignment
Mm,
between my strengths and let me kind of like shout out to Gallup Strength Finders. When when you look at my strengths are not what is the typical set of strengths that an engineer would have.
mhm.
So mine are more relational, so the empathy, the woo, the harmony.
Yeah.
I do have individualization and also futuristic in that top five. um, but yeah, there was that low, let's say low level pain of I'm really not a good fit for this, but because of investing a lot of money in my education and just
Mhm.
fear of doing something else, I didn't break through that pain. But really the biggest setback and challenge that I had was the alcoholism. So I grew up in an alcoholic family. Like I said, that's where that pilot light of alcoholism came along. And yeah, from 2012 to 2016, those were really, really tough years. Those were really, really tough years. And I got divorced in 2012. I got my second DWI arrest in 2012. Then in 2014, I got my third DWI arrest. And then I was very fortunate. I did end up meeting a woman who is my rock and really was there for me when I finally got to that place where I couldn't lower my standards any further than the let's say the consequences that were coming my way, right? Just
Mhm.
the consequence after consequence of getting arrested, spending a night in jail, maybe having to do probation, having to do community service, all of that. Like, so from 2016, excuse me, from 2012 to 2016, I had a lot of growing up to do. So I sobered up in 2016, and from there, the challenges there from that point in terms of setbacks, just like any other business that you would start. You try this out, this doesn't work. You try this other thing out, it doesn't work. And I would say for me in my business, I haven't yet given up on any of the different things that I want to do. So I did a TEDx speech. I do keynoting. I do the workshop facilitation. I do the training courses, and then I do the one-on-one and group coaching. I haven't decided to give up on any one of them yet, which does make it a little bit tough in terms of marketing. But um, I'm letting it all progress and finding out like what's really working for me, what really lights me up. The good thing is all of those still light me up, right? If you drop me in the room and have me speak to 500 people, I'm gonna have more energy when I finish than when I started, just like
Mhm.
any of the other activities.
When you were going through the 2012 to the 2016 and overcoming all of that and getting realigned with really what who Steve is, did it boil down to accountability?
Uh, you know, did it boil down to accountability? Certainly, accountability is important. Certainly, personal accountability, taking personal accountability. I like the idea of radical responsibility. and
There you
and
go.
what I mean by that is that, like, it may not all be my fault, but I am responsible for it. And uh, I really it so yeah, I think accountability aligns really well there, but I see it as me holding myself accountable and being responsible for.
I knew something was in there that we were missing, but I do like the fact that it tied into radical responsibility. I like that. And that is one of the ways of overcoming them is you faced it head on. You knew you had to make a change.
Absolutely,
In
absolutely.
the moments of the doubt or feeling like a failure or even the self what did we call it earlier? Imposter syndrome. How did you stay motivated and maintain your focus on your new objectives while you were trying to stay sober?
Yeah. Yeah. I think faith and hope. I think faith and hope were the two biggest things for me. I didn't grow up a religious person. I didn't grow up in a family that, went to church all the time or anything. In fact, I had an aunt who kind of turned me off from religion just by some of the way that she was a bit of a holy roller. And but I do have a faith in my higher power, and that's what started, in terms of the recovery, right? Like recognizing that I really can lean on a power greater than myself. To me, that's become the Christian God. However, so that's the first part, right? So that faith, and then just always and faith that He has put me on this path for a reason, right? That
Mhm.
that when I became purer, I won't say pure, like I'm not 100% pure, right? Like, but when I became more pure, He allowed me to experience all of my emotions more fully, and it gave me a discernment of, hey, this is really what's meant for you, and this over here is not meant for you, based on the way that I felt in the moment doing those things, right? So whether or not it was, walking into a liquor store, I never felt good walking into the liquor store, and no judgment for those who are in your audience who have a healthy relationship with alcohol,
Yeah.
but I never felt like a good feeling going into a liquor store. And also when I would be just filling out Excel spreadsheets and all those things that most engineers have to do, making calculations, all that, I really didn't feel, it was kind of drudgery. So I really had to have some faith that the feelings that He was giving me were my compass. And then hope, hope that, hey, just because today things aren't going great, that doesn't mean that tomorrow is not going to go great. So I think those two things, faith and hope. Of course, my family, my kids. I'm always marveled at how, they say when you have kids, they say kids don't do what you say, they do what you do. And I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, and my 19-year-old will send me pictures of, oh, hey, I got a whiteboard now, I'm putting my goals up on it, which he saw me do back in 2017. So my kids, faith and hope, for sure. In terms of like, how do I maintain focus, that's a really tough one. And the only thing that came to my mind when I think about that is this, the tomato timer, the Pomodoro. And so for those who are watching this, or maybe if you're just listening to it, I'm holding up a tomato timer like you would have in the kitchen. And so there's this thing called the Pomodoro technique that was created by an Italian gentleman named Francisco Cerillo back in the 80s. And so when I'm having a hard time focusing, I just put 25 minutes on this timer and I do one thing. And because I think we all can do one thing for 25 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. We had a previous guest in 2023 who was a recovering drug addict, and his name was Nate Isaac. And that's not my journey. So hearing stories of addiction and stuff um, took me back into how he equivalated it to he was missing something in his life.
Oh, yeah.
He's missing who he was. And it's set from an early age. He started drugs at the young age of 12.
Mhm.
And it blew me away hearing his story. And it really, with faith and hope and knowing who you are, or who, if you don't have a higher power or whatever, but just really defining who you want to be, who you see yourself becoming without the drug and addictions, is where he began to thrive. And seeing him now at 35 and being successful in his story, it was a wow factor for me, because though my journey is not alcoholism or drug addict, I have my faults
Mhm.
where I wasn't feeling who Mel was. And so I love how they all have that same type of synergy, where the missing link is who we want to be and who we need to be and how do we get there.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. My next question that I like to ask on this podcast is a little bit more hope inspiring. And so it talks about sharing a memorable victory or
Oh,
success
yeah.
story in your journey. All of that can kind of weigh us down in the past, but what's one particular victory in there that you know set yourself up for success?
It's tough to pick one, but I'll go back to kind of the genesis of all of this is, as I mentioned. So I left corporate in 2020 just to help with the timeline. So I left corporate completely in 2020. Back in 2017, though, so now I have my personal power, right? I'm no longer
Hmm.
addicted to alcohol. I'm working on my emotional sobriety, my connection to my higher power. I'm living a completely different life. In 2017, I remember buying a whiteboard and hanging it up in my kitchen next to my where I kept my laptop. And on it, I wrote, "Start a coaching and training company by 2020 and deliver a TEDx speech 2022." And I just kind of arbitrarily threw those up there based on my own limiting beliefs of what would be possible in a certain amount of time. So I put that up there in 2017. Now, what's crazy is that because of the reticular activating system in the brain, meaning that if we allow a thought, that the brain, it will program the subconscious, and the subconscious will then be on the lookout for it. It's kind of like when you buy a new car, and before you bought that new car you never saw that car on the road, and then you buy it, and then all of a sudden you see them all over the world, all over the road, excuse me. And that's the reticular activating system. So the very fact that I had written up on the board, start a coaching and training company, created that vision. And what happened that was really crazy was that back when I was at Cirrus Logic, I was the club president for the Toastmasters Club. And I got an email from a person down the street. Her name is Sarah Cox. At that time, she worked for Black Locust, which is the innovation lab of Home Depot. She said, "Hey, can we come to your club?" And of course, doing like any good corporate citizen, I ran it up the flagpole and asked our sponsor of the club and their human resources department. And they said, "No, no, no. We have non-disclosure. We have all kinds of company secrets probably being presented at the Toastmasters Club," which is untrue, but it didn't matter. They said no. But because I had written that goal on the whiteboard, it caused me to ask a follow-on question. Of course, I'm telling her, "Sorry, I can't do it. Any way I can help, I'd be glad to help you. I can tell you where other clubs are. I can help you start a club." But for whatever reason, it inspired me to ask the question of, "What is it you hope would happen as a result of visiting our club?" And she said, "Well, we have about 10 people here who really, really need to work on their public speaking." And that made the second light bulb go off of, "Ah, they could be my first client." And so
Yeah.
what I said to her was, I said, "Hey, I'll come there. I'll take a PTO day. I'll come over there and I'll teach the course. And you don't have to pay me. I just want testimonials and to be able to use your logo on my website in the future, et cetera, et cetera." Well, cut to a couple weeks later, she says, "Hey, no matter what, we're going to pay you. You're the real deal. I know that you can really help us. So you set the price." And so I set the price and then divided it by two and gave them a 50% off. And then I went back and I taught the class again. So I taught the class that first time, had really, really great feedback. I came back, taught the class again, taught another class there, ended up coaching one of the directors at the company. So that was, to me, I think that was a pretty darn good first win in this
Yeah.
space. Yeah. And then since then, there's been, client wins, clients who double their income, clients who scale their business to $2 million in the first year. Uh, there's been clients who came to me for like, "Oh, I want to work on my work-life balance." And then I ended up helping them get sober, and they just celebrated their second year of continuous
Wow.
sobriety.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's really, when I think about my biggest wins, they're really about the people that I serve.
Yep. And it ties into that, but by helping others, we help ourselves.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times we end up healing ourselves in ways that we didn't know that we're needing to be healed because we just it's more God led at that point.
Mhm.
Recognizing um, that all of that in this stuff, what advice would you give to those that are looking to share their own story or pursue their passions? Maybe they're not in alignment right now. Maybe they're listening and going, I hear what he's saying and he makes it sound so easy, but
Yeah.
I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, I hope this makes sense. And I'm gonna start with a pretty simple statement, which is you don't need to wait. You don't need to wait. Um, the pain of regret is stronger, but it's on a delay fuse. So, in
Mm-hmm.
other words, like we don't really recognize that pain of regret until years later when we're like, oh, I had that idea. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? So that it's on a slow fuse.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the pain of failure is actually much lower than we anticipate up here.
Mm-hmm.
So, people think about, oh, it's going to be, I don't want to fail. But the pain of failure is actually really, really low because it's just the thought. It's the thought of failure. Like, oh, there's really not a whole lot of real pain. It's more of us thinking about what that pain will be like if we do fail. But it is immediate. So that's the good part about it is that when you take action and you fail somehow, and really even failure, it's learning, right? It reminds me, the quote, Nelson Mandela said is, I never lose, I either win or learn.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the first thing is you don't need to wait, and then you can start small. And so looking back on my journey, there I was still a W-2 employee, and I told my boss very candidly, very openly, hey, there's 168 hours in every week, 56 for this job, 56 for me to sleep, and 56 for me to do whatever it is that I want. And I want to go off and do something that is not not at all in conflict to my employment agreement. In other words, it wasn't like I wanted to go off, I'm a quality and reliability expert from my career. It wasn't like I wanted to go do quality and reliability
Yep.
consulting somewhere, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do things that were not, they're completely different than what I wanted to do. So I started small. So there I was still getting my W-2 paycheck, but I was doing this kind of on the side. And I know you said, like one thing, but if I could keep going, I
Oh, go
really
ahead. Go ahead. We're having
okay,
good
cool.
timing. Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
cool. The other thing that's really important is I think people need to audit their inputs. What do I mean by auditing your inputs? And let me tell you, man, ever since TikTok took off, my inputs, I struggle with really turning off the unhelpful
Mm,
things to watch. And so what I mean by audit inputs is really look at what it is you listen to, what it is you watch, and who it is that you're around. Jim Rohn said you become the average of the five people that you're closest to, right? Like, in other words, he could estimate your salary based on who those five people are around you. So, part of my transformation from my alcohol days to who it is that I am today, it was I had to shed people. I had to shed people. I had to shed ideas. I had to shed certain music that I listened to, certain
mhm.
television that I watched. So really auditing your inputs is important. Um, and then last but not least, and I kind of mentioned this is following your feelings. It truly a signal. If you have negative feelings, investigate that. If you have positive feelings, investigate that too. What is it that I'm when you have negative feelings, ask yourself, like, what is it that I'm believing about myself or the world that has me feeling this way? I
Mm.
know that was a ton of stuff. That's a
No,
lot
hey,
more.
you guys listening in right now, if y'all are looking for a coach, y'all just heard a bit of his piece right there. Reach out to him. You can probably find him through LinkedIn, just like I did.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
we're gonna
absolutely.
into the last question that is like the serious side of things, but actually it's not all that serious. It's a good one. It's a heartfelt one. In our journeys, we know that we don't do any season alone.
Mhm.
We're not meant to.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and so recognizing that we all need support and guidance on our journey, whether it's from a coach, from a friend, from a mentor, from a colleague. Can you share a few mentors or
Oh,
colleagues that
absolutely.
played a significant role in providing wisdom and support in your life and
Yeah,
why that makes it important?
yeah, absolutely. And I first, for anybody listening, the power of mentors, it is really underrated. Tim Ferriss, the guy who wrote the 4 Hour Work Week, he also wrote a book called Tribe of Mentors, and it shows how incredibly powerful having a group of people who really can impart their wisdom can be to you. And so I've had really a tribe of mentors, and it started, oof, boy, all the way back at ST Microelectronics with Bob Banks. He was a vice president of quality, and he asked me a really important question when I was changing my career. Uh, so gosh, it's really there's so many people, but I'll just give a couple. All right. So when I started to make my career transition, Bob Lewis. So Bob Lewis, another Bob Lewis, who owns a training company. I remember walking up to him at the end of a Strength Finders workshop, and I said, "I want to be like you when I grow up." I got his business card, and we would talk on the phone, and he would impart some of his wisdom and also his journey for me. Lisa Cummings, she's a strengths-based coach and workshop facilitator. Same thing. I met with her after something that happened at Samsung, a big event that we had at Samsung, and I said, "Hey, I'd really love to learn more about you. I want to be like you when I grow up." Right. Then I hired my own coaches throughout my journey, and there's too many to name, but I'll mention the two. The first coach that I hired when I was in coach training was a gentleman named Fraser Cameron. And Fraser, he's from New Zealand originally, and he has this courage, this confidence that I really wanted to live into. I wanted that in my life. I wanted to work with somebody who could push me to really lean into my edge. And what I mean by my edge is really get close to failure. Push myself to the point where I'm very fair. I'm afraid, but I'm doing it anyway.
That's
Right?
my philosophy right there.
Yeah.
Be afraid.
Yeah.
You won't regret doing it or afraid, but you'll regret not doing it at all.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And then, most notably, I worked with a coach named Steve Chandler. Anybody in the coaching world probably knows who Steve Chandler is. He's written 34 books. He's also somebody in the recovery space, meaning, he used to be an alcoholic. So as soon as I saw him and read about him, read a couple of his books, I remember I had a particularly great month. And I said, "This is a bucket list coach." I said, I need to work with this guy." And so I worked with him, and I continued to be influenced by him through his books and the training that he has offered. So yeah, they're just some of the folks. And I really owe them all a real debt of gratitude. And of course, even when you can't, let's say that if the finances or time are a limitation on working with a coach or a mentor, there's tons of great books, there's tons of great resources, and those books can become your mentors.
I love reading, and it's definitely helped me engage in what I want to do for future goal setting, whiteboard, however you do it.
Hmm.
But I love hearing about people's mentors. And there was a period of time in my life where I thought that I could continue to grow on my own without sharing or having, or like it was too scary to tell people I want to start a podcast
Hmm.
because I didn't want to hear people say, "Oh, you know,"
Hmm.
like I didn't want to hear any objection. But it was perfect timing when I started to come out of my shell and be like, "Okay, this is my dream. Don't knock it.
Yeah.
Please don't. But this is the vision of it. What do you think?" And then they call me back or we set a meeting and they're like, "This is incredible. Why have you been waiting on this?" Well, there's a little bit thing called like, imposter
Yeah, or
syndrome or
procrastination.
procrastination or,
Yep.
someone out there is doing it better,
Yeah.
comparison.
Yeah.
And when it really got down to it, well, not only do I think this is great, I'll be one of your guests. And I'm like, what? I didn't even
Mhm.
think of that component to speaking and engaging and telling would be part of my mentor or my tribe. And I'm thankful for it. And so I hope those that are listening today realize that if you're in that gap, in that season where you feel like no one is for you and everything's against you, it's because you haven't really begun to reach out.
Yeah.
And you do have to do the reaching out, which is probably the most daunting thing you can do because you are being vulnerable, but do it afraid. Well, now we
Yeah.
get to have the fun part, Steve. Ready for this?
Absolutely.
So, in the fun questions, what does Steve do to recharge, to unplug, to make sure that you are not, well, now that you're in the entrepreneur mindset and, building content and booking clients, it can get very, like you said, what your input versus your output. So, what do you do to make sure it's balanced?
It's funny to think about it. It's the same thing I've been doing since I was 6 years old, which is ride a bike. Ride a bike.
Oh,
So
I
I
love
mountain bike. Yeah, I'm a mountain biker. Uh, really, so I was 311 pounds in high school after breaking an elbow. So I broke my right elbow and stopped riding my bicycle and ended up, eating Doritos and drinking Coca-Cola every night and playing on my computer. And I ballooned up to 311. And when how I lost it was to get back on the bike. So when I was in college, I bought myself a hybrid. I had that hybrid for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then I bought myself a mountain bike. And from there, I've continued. I raced BMX when I was a little kid, so the bicycle has always been present. So that's my my main way to unplug. And the cool thing about it is that oftentimes I get a lot of inspiration while I'm out on a bike ride. And if I haven't posted them, well, actually, I did. I just posted one last week. Oftentimes, I'll go out on a bike ride and I bring with me. Obviously, I have my phone. I also have this tripod that's more like it's got three legs that you can kind of grab around anything. So I'll mount my phone to a tree
hmm
and I'll start the video. And I go up and I'll find some piece of the trail and I'll ride through it and I'll go back and I'll edit the video. Uh, but I get inspired to make content when I'm out on a bike ride, and I'll sometimes I'll read audiobooks. Sometimes I'll use Blinkist. Blinkist is my, let's call it, mini learning. I don't like micro learning anymore because now people call TikTok a micro learning platform. So it's just a
Yeah.
mini learning, not micro. And I'll get inspired. I'll listen to something and I'll go, oh, you know what? This would be a really cool video or a good post or something.
hmm
But certainly, yeah, the mountain biking, the exhilarating feeling, going out there and riding the trails. It's kind of like life, right? There's always obstacles, and we figure out ways of overcoming them when we're out
Yeah.
there.
I got a bike for Christmas this year, and I hadn't rode a bike in probably 12 years. So I've moved since then. I haven't got back into the routine of it with the weather. It's freezing
Oh,
today.
of course, yeah,
but I do get the wind in your hair and the different. It doesn't feel like exercise, but you are
yeah, yeah,
exercising. So I get it, and I love that for Steve. Steve's doing it for Steve, and how it
absolutely.
brings inspiration. When I read or listen to music, or sometimes it's just being with my kids. All of a sudden, an idea will pop up, and so I always have like
Hmm.
a notebook with a pen, to write that down, or I'll forget, so I can put it to what it taught me or what it brought to my attention. So the last question, and I thank you for joining this podcast, is what piece of advice or best piece of advice you've ever received or you've created yourself that's influenced your career or your life in general that you could share with those that are listening today?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's funny too because I don't know if you could call it a limiting thought or a limiting belief or whatever, is that I feel like there's nothing new under the sun. We're all standing on the shoulders of giants. And so the two quotes that I have are from other people, right? And
Yeah.
so, number one, like I mentioned, Bob Banks. So, Bob, when I was leaving ST Microelectronics, he asked me, so this is around change. Like anytime we're making a change in our life, anytime we're at a fork in the road, we need to ask ourselves, are we running away from or running to? And that really speaks to what's motivating us, right? Because actually, that brings up another quote that I'm going to rob from somebody else, but I always give them credit. Are we trying to avoid pain, or are we running toward our vision or our pleasure, whatever it is? And there's a quote from a spiritualist named Michael Beckwith. He says, pain pushes until the vision pulls. And I
Mm,
think it's akin to this idea of, are you running away from or running to? So anytime that you're faced with indecision, ask yourself that, because it really points to your motives. If you're really running away from something, then you need to really pump the brakes, because maybe what you're running to really isn't for you. It's just an escape plan. And then there's a great Shakespeare quote, and it's so simple and neat because I'm not great at memorizing long,
same.
like some soliloquy or
Yeah,
something
same.
out of Hamlet. Oh, this is from Hamlet. He says, there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And what this points to is that we get to decide the meaning of things. If a person puts a hand on a hot stove, they could let it mean that, gosh, I'm an idiot for putting my hand on a hot stove. But what might be more helpful and maybe even truer is that that's how I learned not to put my hand on a hot stove. Right. So
Mm,
one of them really is an indictment of self judgment, and another one is just about growth. But we get to decide. So there is no good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
I like that. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for joining us today. I'm glad we were able to hop on for the new year and tackle getting to know each other. I love how Lincoln and other colleagues can help connect others and
Absolutely.
everything like that. So, well, guys, you can tune into this podcast on our YouTube channel, Unplug with Mel, and you can hear us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks, Mel.